Hey folks, Nathan here. Welcome to Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games, and we are looking this time at part 3 of our coverage of the legendary deck building game, also known as Legendary, a Marvel deck building game. Now, in 2014, there were 3 new releases. We had 2 small expansions, and then 1 new core boxed set, in case you wanted to try your hand at playing as the villains against the heroes rather than the other way around. Kind of like Forever Evil changed things up for the DC deck building game. We're going to look at the Legendary Villains core set in our next episode as a separate topic. This time, we want to take a look at both of the smaller expansions that came out in 2014. Again, I bought these as a giant lot from eBay, so I do not have the boxes to show you. They are both those small sets, though. We're going to look at Paint the Town Red, which is a Spider-Man focused expansion, and Guardians of the Galaxy, focused on, of course, that team. In each case, we're going to have a total of 5 new heroes, we're going to have 2 new masterminds, we're going to have 2 new villain groups, and we're going to have 4 new schemes, which will tend to be the approach taken often for these smaller sets. We'll start with Paint the Town Red. Again, there are 4 new schemes. We have Invade the Daily Bugle News Headquarters, Weave a Web of Lies, The Clone Saga, and Splice Humans with Spider DNA. Our masterminds, which as always have a mastermind card and 4 mastermind tactics underneath, are 2 this time, Carnage and Mysterio. As usual, we then have 2 villain groups. We have Maximum Carnage and we have Sinister Six. Then finally we have our new heroes. From Marvel Knights, there's a team icon up there, we have Moon Knight. And then from the group we know already from the core set as the Spider Friends, we have Black Cat, Spider-Woman, Scarlet Spider, and then Symbiote Spider-Man. As usual, we have some new mechanics, new keywords and such. One of those new keywords is Wall Crawl. Wall Crawl basically means that if that card is sitting in the headquarters and you pay recruit points to acquire that card, not if another card just says gain a card, but if you actually pay the recruit points to pick up that card out of the headquarters, you can then turn around and immediately put that card on top of your deck instead of into your discard pile, which gives you access to it the next time you draw a card, whether on this turn as part of the course of your actions or at the end of the turn when you draw your new hand. Very useful. We also have a new keyword, Feast. What Feast basically means is that when you fight this enemy up there in the city, wherever they happen to be, not only do you do what's on there, but you treat it as if there's one of those fight keywords, and the immediate effect is that you have to KO the top card of your deck. The Carnage Mastermind actually has a variant on this for the Master Strike, which is Master Strike Feast on each player. Whenever this Master Strike feasts on a player's 0-cost hero, that player gains a wound. So a little more complex. Everybody has to KO the top card of their deck, and if the card that's KO'd is a 0-cost hero, say one of your starting cards, then it turns out that not only do you have to do that KO, you also gain a wound that goes into your discard pile. Meanwhile, Mysterio has a cool new mechanic because he's the Master of Illusions. His Master Strike and some of his Mastermind tactics have a similar ability. Master Strike, shuffle this Master Strike into Mysterio's face-down Mastermind tactics. That card becomes a Mastermind tactic worth 6 victory points. So as long as you keep pulling Master Strikes, every time you do that, you wind up turning that Master Strike into a new Mastermind tactic. So to beat Mysterio, you're not going to have to usually take out just 4 Mastermind tactics. It may be well above that. 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, depending on how many Master Strikes get drawn. So another of these interesting new expansions, not a major game changer, but gives us some more keywords and interesting ways to tweak our gameplay. That same year, we saw the release of Legendary Guardians of the Galaxy, and this one is pretty much the same type of material, although you're going to wind up finding that in this game, you're going to wind up getting what are called shards if you're playing with Guardians of the Galaxy, and shards require tokens. And while later sets will have cards that act as tokens, in this case, they are actual little tokens that have certain amounts on either side. There's a total of 18 of these tokens packed in. This is the only one of the legendary sets thus far that actually uses these kinds of tokens. So think of these kind of like those victory point tokens or frozen tokens that only show up if you're playing with, say, Forever Evil or one of its spin-offs for the DC deck building game. We then, of course, have 4 new schemes. In this case, we have Unite the Shards, the Kree Skrull War, Intergalactic Kree Negabomb, and Forge the Infinity Gauntlet. Then we have 2 masterminds, each with their 4 mastermind tactics. We have Supreme Intelligence of the Kree, and the big bad here, Thanos. Then, of course, we have to have our villain groups, and this time they're a little bit different. We have the Infinity Gems themselves as a villain group. More on this in a moment. And we have the Kree Star Force as a villain group. And then we have our heroes, all of whom are members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, as one would expect. So we have Gamora, we have Drax the Destroyer, we have Star-Lord, we have Rocket Raccoon, and we have Groot. It's kind of what you would expect as far as the heroes go. A note here as well that if you look up in the corner, there's your new Guardians of the Galaxy team symbol. So let's talk about those shards. Every once in a while, you'll come across a card like this one where it says, blah, 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 gain a shard. When you gain a shard, you stick a shard counter in front of you. Okay? And then on that turn or another turn, because you don't have to use it immediately, you can just keep it sitting in front of you, you can spend that shard and stick it back in the supply to get +1 attack. And you can spend as many as you want on any given turn, so if you save up a bunch of them, that could be a nice bonus to your attack the next time maybe you go after the mastermind, let's say. Unfortunately, you might also see a villain wind up gaining a shard. And if a villain gains a shard, basically it sits next to them, like with Supremor here, his ambush ability, Supremor and the mastermind each gain a shard. As soon as you put a shard on a villain, it increases their attack rating by 1. So 1 shard would take this from 3 to 4, 2 would take it from 3 to 5, and so on. But when you defeat that villain, not only do you get them for those victory points, but thankfully, you also wind up getting 1 of their shards. The rest of them go back to the supply. On the other hand, if it turns out that that villain makes its way all the way through the city and escapes with those shards still on it, then 1 of the shards jumps over to the mastermind, and the rest of them go back into the supply. Anytime a mastermind gains a shard, either by one of its own abilities or by something happening maybe with a villain like we just saw, then that also increases the mastermind's attack rating by 1. And when you defeat them once to knock out 1 of their mastermind tactics, you get 1 of their shards. All the rest then go into the pile, the supply, and it's only then that you do the fight ability on their mastermind tactic. That way, you've cleared out the shards, and then the fight ability happens because the fight ability might actually give them new shards to use in future turns. Now, one thing you may have noticed in this game that seems to be missing when most other games have it are ongoing cards. Cards that you have that you play in front of you, and it stays in play throughout, rather than being something that just gets played and then discarded at the end of the turn. Kind of like a construct in Ascension. Well, we finally have that in the form of these artifact keyword cards. Okay? And artifact is going to be an instance in which you have a card that comes in, say it's a hero artifact like this one, right? So it's a hero card, but it happens to be an artifact. It's going to come in by acquiring it from the headquarters, go into your discard pile, wind up eventually shuffled into your deck, then it goes in your hand, and then you play it. When you play it, though, it stays sitting in front of you, and you can use that ability each turn. It only counts as played on the turn you actually deployed it out there. But you can use that ability turn after turn after turn on your turn. We then have one other kind of weird one, which is the one that I mentioned before, the villain group that's Infinity Gems. These sort of represent the current wielder of that Infinity Gem. But once you defeat them while they're somewhere out here in the city, right, because they are villains, once you defeat them, it goes into your discard pile and becomes an artifact that you can play just like those hero artifacts for those ongoing effects. Essentially, while they're up here or they're in the villain deck, they're treated like it's a villain using the gem, but as soon as you defeat them, it's like you've taken the gem itself from that defeated foe. So kind of cool there, but it does make for some kind of complex cards that often have an ambush and a fight, might have an escape, but then has an artifact down there at the bottom as well. Lots of information on those Infinity Gem cards. So it doesn't add a lot new to the table, but we do have the shards with their little tokens, though they don't affect things that much. We do have the new Guardians of the Galaxy team, but most importantly, we have those artifacts to finally have something like an Ascension construct that can stay in front of you and continue onward, very much like a location in the DC deck building game or a construct in Ascension. So a pair of decent, small expansions here in 2014. Though, of course, the biggest drop of 2014 was Legendary Villains, a Marvel deck building game. We'll see that in our next episode.